Last week, I received an invitation to the 160th anniversary of the pumping station at Crossness. What's so special about a pumping station, I hear you ask? Well, firstly, if you were less cynical, maybe you'd get invited to these things too. But secondly, this is what's so special about Crossness. It is an absolutely magnificent example of Victorian industrial heritage. What could merit such a glorious work of engineering? Well, it's sewage. Crossness was part of a massive rebuilding of London's sewer system that was every bit as important to the city as its railways, its roads, or its docks, but which, very deliberately, was kept out of sight. To understand why it was built, we need to go back to the middle of the 19th century. In the 1840s, the prevailing theory of disease was something known as miasma theory. The idea was that decaying matter released miasma, foul air that people breathed in which caused disease. Or, to put it simply, things that smelled bad made you ill. A Dr. John Snow, based in London's Soho, was more sceptical. He had a great deal of experience in treating cholera and believed that what he saw was inconsistent with miasma theory. In 1849, following an epidemic of the disease, he published a paper titled On the Mode of Communication of Cholera. This proposed that it was transmitted through contaminated drinking water. Just 5 years later, another cholera epidemic would break out in Soho, and this would give him an opportunity to examine his theory still further. With the help of local priest Henry Whitehead, he mapped out every case. A picture emerged, in a literal sense. Every single person who'd got ill had drunk water from the pump on Broad Street. In response, the parish council removed the pump's handle. What had happened was that a baby had contracted the disease, and their nappies were thrown into a cesspit, which had leaked into the water and thus spread to the entire parish. The medical establishment remained sceptical of Snow's findings. Firstly, because the scientific community didn't much like having their long-held beliefs overturned. Secondly, because Dr. Snow was seen as something of an eccentric, being teetotal, vegetarian, and socially awkward. And thirdly, because the idea that people were drinking poo was just icky. Nevertheless, Snow's findings were part of a wider campaign against the state of water in London that had been going on for some time. The Industrial Revolution had caused the city to expand massively, yet the sewers were basically medieval. Many were simply streams and rivers. Others were inadequate drains designed for surface water. There were neither standards nor consistency. That is, where there were drains at all. For many people, waste was dumped into a cesspit behind the house that was collected by the night soil men. Conditions became worse and worse, especially for the poor. Crowded slums were the incubators of epidemics. Edwin Chadwick, a lawyer and secretary to the Poor Law Commission, was an advocate of miasma theory. But nevertheless, he could see that there was a connection between the abysmal sanitation situation and disease. He described the system of waste disposal as a vast monument of defective administration, of lavish expenditure, and extremely defective execution. Ironically, his solution would make things worse. The eventual outcome was the passing of the Cholera Act and the formation of the Metropolitan Sewers Commission in 1848. The Act demanded that all houses in London be connected to the sewers and all cesspits decommissioned. The Commission combined all the sewer companies under a single authority. As a result of these measures, a larger amount of sewage than ever before was flushed into the Thames. The same Thames that many of the water suppliers drew from, with the result that cholera afflicted not only the poor, but anyone who drank Thames water. In 1849, as Dr. Snow was working on his theories, an engineer named Joseph Bazalgette was hired by the Metropolitan Sewers Commission. Bazalgette's background was actually more in railways, and he was recommended by both Robert Stevenson and Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Unfortunately for Bazalgette, the one thing more snarled up than the sewers was the bureaucracy surrounding the commission. A second commission was set up, and a third, and a fourth. In 1852, following the death of his superior, possibly related to stress, Bazalgette found himself promoted to the post of engineer to the Fourth Commission, but he had no more success than any of his predecessors. Meanwhile, an invention that was increasing in popularity was putting further strain on the existing infrastructure. At the Great Exhibition of 1851, the new water closet had been a popular exhibit, with the result that many houses in the 1850s were getting flush toilets installed. The medieval sewers were not designed for the quantity of fluid discharged by these devices, and it became clear that what provided relief for many would cause further discomfort to the Commission. In 1855, the Metropolis Management Act was passed. Under this, the Metropolitan Board of Works was formed in 1856, and Bazalgette was elected to the post of Chief Engineer. The Board of Works took charge of matters related to infrastructure in the city as a whole. Streets, bridges, open spaces, and, perhaps most importantly of all, sewers. Finally, Bazalgette could get to work on what many would consider to be his greatest achievement. Bazalgette took just 12 weeks to come up with a solution. It was simple and elegant. He would construct a network of intercepting sewers running across the existing network. Where sewage had once run into the Thames, now it would run into the new sewers. 2 massive pumping stations would be built to the east of London, Abbey Mills on the north bank and Crossness on the south bank. These were part of a network of pumping stations that would use powerful steam engines to slurp the sewage out of the city and spit it into the Thames outside the city. The idea was sound, but there was a problem. One of the provisions of the Metropolitan Management Act was that sewage could not be discharged into the Thames within the bounds of the metropolis. Abbey Mills and Crossness were, just about, within those bounds. Except the government weren't willing to pay for the outflows to be positioned further downstream. Once again, bureaucracy had prevented action from being taken. The Lancet, the medical journal, warned of the risks of inaction. The scientist Michael Faraday carried out an experiment that determined the water was so polluted that it was opaque beyond a depth of a single inch. So, how do you get the government to act in such situations? You make it their problem. And that's exactly what happened in 1858. In June of that year, London was hit by a heat wave. More pertinently, the river was hit by it. This was the Great Stink. The Palace of Westminster, located next to the river, was severely afflicted. The stench brought government to a halt as members of Parliament fled from the nauseating fumes. Remember that as far as anyone knew, smell was not only a matter of discomfort, but, per miasma theory, physical health. Sheets soaked in chloride of lime were hung in the windows in the hope of mitigating the smell, but to no avail. The government blamed the Board of Works, who, in turn, blamed the government. The city press observed that the discourse stank almost as much as the river. Others were perversely hopeful that the situation would worsen to the point where the government would have no choice but to take action, regardless of expense or culpability. Upon hearing that MPs were being driven from their offices with handkerchiefs over their faces, the Times commented, "We are heartily glad of it." In the face of such noisome opposition, the Metropolis Local Management Amendment Act was introduced on the 15th of July and passed on the 2nd of August. The significant difference between this and the original act was simply that the sewage had to be discharged as far as may be practical from the main metropolis. This simple change of wording meant that Bazalgette's original plan could be put into action. Bazalgette was back in the chair and set to work. The work was one of the greatest in terms of both scope and size ever conducted in the city. For not only did the sewers have to take care of the effluent of 2.5 million people, but they had to anticipate the growth of the city. Their plans also had to take into account basements, canals, and railways. Bazalgette refused to compromise in his designs. Only the best materials would do and hang the cost, which was not really what the government wanted to hear, but the press, at least those based in London, generally came out in Bazalgette's favour. In 1865, the first phase of construction was completed, the Southern Outfall Complex, and with it came the opening of Crossness Pumping Station. The station was equipped with 4 enormous beam engines, the largest rotative engines in the world, weighing 240 tons apiece. On the 4th of April, a party of VIPs, including the Prince of Wales, the Duke of Cambridge, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Archbishop of York, and the Lord Mayors of London and Dublin, attended the opening ceremony. I suppose we could make some pun on the word rank here, but you know I'd never stoop so low. Anyway, the Prince of Wales set the engines to work. Technically, Crossness was not fully completed until 1867, but it was operating, and that was the important thing. The southern network was only part of the system. There was still more to be done. Abbey Mills opened in 1868, although with rather less pomp and circumstance. In 1870, the Thames embankments were opened, which are now a major part of the central London landscape, but whose raison d'etre is to cover the intercepting sewers. It wasn't until the completion of the western area in 1875 that London would have its new, modern, future-proofed sewer system that would no doubt have been the envy of the world if it weren't for the fact that people don't like to think about sewers. But we're here to talk about Crossness, or, to use its official title, the Southern Outfall Works. To be honest, I just sort of got carried away there talking about sewage, as one does. If you tried to build Crossness pumping station now, you'd probably be accused of wasting money because the thing is so unnecessarily elaborate. The mechanical aspects were the work of Bazalgette, the architect was Charles Henry Driver, and the builder was William Webster. While the engines were designed by Bazalgette, they were built by James Watt & Co. There are 4 engines: Prince Consort, Victoria, Albert Edward, and Alexandra. History does not record how those august personages felt about having the world's largest sewage pumps named after them, although the Queen herself would duck out of the opening of the Victoria embankment, because she said the heat would give her a headache. The engine you see working is Prince Consort, restored in 2003. What's now an exhibition hall was once the boiler room, full of coal-fired boilers supplied by rail. East of London was a popular place to put things that people didn't really want in the city. Consequently, a lot of industrial sites were based here. The sewage outfalls, most obviously, but Crossness was next to lands owned by the Royal Arsenal. There was once an extensive network of railways serving the industries east of the metropolis. The Royal Arsenal narrow-gauge railway, which we used to get from the main gates to the pumping station itself, is a reminder of this. The octagon here is very much the money shot with its elaborate ironwork. Here is the monogram of the Metropolitan Board of Works, but there's also some cheeky symbolism at work. The plants here are all very deliberately chosen. The fruits you see there are figs and senna pods, and the flowers are dogwood and bramble. Figs and senna pods are traditional laxatives. Dogwood seeds were used to treat diarrhea, and various bits of the bramble plant provided relief from dysentery, diarrhea, and hemorrhoids. Kept things flowing correctly, so to speak. What these plants did for the body, Crossness did for the body politic. Or, to put it more crudely, the outfall discharges were London's bum. I sometimes wonder if the reason we have so many conspiracy theorists today is because back then the world really was full of secret symbols, and we just miss it now. The system was relatively crude. The engines pumped the sewage into reservoirs. Then, at high tide, these were flushed out. This meant that the sewage was not washed back into the city, but rather taken out to sea, for the most part at least. The system was not perfect. I mean, let's make no bones about it, it did still discharge raw sewage into the Thames. It just relied on nature to make sure things weren't as bad as they had been. The people of Barking complained that they were bearing the brunt, so to speak, of the smell. There were other critics of the system, although the journal The Builder suggested that a massive discharge of sewage from both outflows could be used as a means of defending the city from invaders. Others advocated selling the sewage as fertilizer. But things could go badly wrong. In 1878, the pleasure steamer Princess Alice collided with the collier Bywell Castle and sank, resulting in the deaths of over 600 people. The fact that it did so by the sewage outfalls was a contributing factor. The water was heavily polluted by raw sewage, as well as waste from other industries east of the city. A royal commission concluded in 1882 that the sewage should be treated before release, with the solid matter, so to speak, being shipped out to sea rather than dumped straight into the river. The sludge boats used to do so were nicknamed Bovril boats. No comment. In 1888, a means of purifying sewage by means of electrolysis was trialled at Crossness. I don't fully understand how it works. I barely scraped a B in my chemistry GCSE. The method was devised by William Webster, son of the chap behind the station's construction. In 1999, dumping would stop altogether with the installation of an incinerator. This, and other means of chemical and biological treatment, means that the water released into the Thames is theoretically even cleaner than the river itself, as one would expect. Why, if a water company were found to be letting raw sewage into Britain's waters today, we'd expect its executives to resign in disgrace, wouldn't we? The demands placed on Crossness increased over the decades. In the late 1890s, an extension was added, with 4 more pumps driven by triple expansion engines. In 1917, the boiler house was also extended. But as time passed, those early beam engines that had once been the marvel of the age found themselves superseded, being demoted to backups in 1920. In 1947, the triple expansion engines were replaced with diesels. And finally, in 1953, the entire station was replaced by a new treatment works. Perhaps appropriately, it was one of the first engines that found itself last in use. Prince Consort was brought out of retirement shortly after being decommissioned in order to help with flooding on the nearby low-lying land. The magnificent chimney was demolished in 1958. Even the chimney here was fancy. But the old Watt engines remained exactly where they were. Quite simply, they were so big that removing them would cost more than their scrap value. Such valuable bits as could be removed were, and the engines were left to rust. But that was, of course, not the end of the story. In 1980, the engine house was Grade 1 listed. To put that into perspective, Grade 1 puts it on a par with the Houses of Parliament and Buckingham Palace, to which I say a jolly good thing too. We could do without our mansions and country houses, but where would we be without our sewers? This was followed by the formation of the Crossness Beam Engines Preservation Group in 1985, and the Crossness Engines Trust being registered as a charity in 1988. Since then, Prince Consort has been restored to working order, and work is well underway on fixing Victoria up. There's now an exhibition on the history of London's sewers in the old boiler house. The boilers that now power the engines are smaller and more discreet. And of course there's the Royal Arsenal Narrow Gauge Railway. The sewage works still operating at Crossness is now the second largest in Europe, second only to the one at Beckton on the other side of the river. Bazalgette's sewers are still in operation today, and it's only recently that it's become necessary to upgrade them with the addition of the Thames Tideway Tunnel. Undoubtedly, whatever its flaws, Bazalgette's system worked. After 1866, there were no more cholera epidemics. As for Bazalgette, he would be knighted in 1874, a proposal to pay him a £6,000 bonus having been turned down. He would work on many other projects. Hammersmith Bridge and Putney Bridge are his. He was involved in the creation of the Woolwich Free Ferry, which is still operating to this day. He had a hand in the Blackwall Tunnel, Tower Bridge, Shaftesbury Avenue and Charing Cross Road, among others. But it's for his invaluable, if unglamorous, work on the sewers that he's best remembered. Well, I do hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please do click the like button and consider subscribing for more. I would like to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your always generous support. You are the pumping engine to my sewer. I should have thought that one through a bit more. I must also thank the people at Crossness for inviting me over and letting me poke around. The Trust has a number of open days, and I'd strongly recommend checking it out. I'll put a link in the description below. Restoration is ongoing. The Trust is always looking for volunteers if you'd like to get involved. As well as the material provided by the Trust and its volunteers, much of the material for this came from Stephen Halliday's The Great Filth and the Great Stink, and Deborah Cadbury's 7 Wonders of the Industrial World, if you would like to know more. And all that remains for me to say is that I'll see you all again very soon. Cheerio.